Hi folks, now we're going to go through this, the INFJ NiFx Model G. Be careful, now I've got to go over to the thing I am sharing, and I have to be... So, this is why I call it NiFx. Now, Dr. Gulenko calls it... Well, actually, he uses Roman letters, and he would call this type TR. So, NiFi. I don't go quite that far, but I sort of say it depends on the mode. That sometimes they are NiFe, and sometimes they are NiFi. So let's start off with that notion straight away before we get into an explanation of the model of how INFJ sometimes is NiFi. And I got permission from Jonathan to show this. And just writing something down. I have a can next to me of something to drink. So, for those watching this on a mobile device, I will read this out without doing a patronising Scottish accent. My relationship... No, I can't do that. That was more northern. Glasgow. My relationship to FI is complicated. On principle, favouring FI over FE feels selfish to me, inconsiderate of other people's feelings. I definitely value my emotions, but they aren't usually my focus, and am inclined to question and interrogate them if I don't think they are justified or right. Though at the same time, I'm not always conscious of how I'm feeling and my natural state when I'm not thinking about or doing anything. Feels emotionally neutral, not depressed or anything, more like my emotions are playing quietly in the background where I can't hear or feel them. Jonathan is an Enneagram type 1 and Catholic. When I think of FI as a creative function, that makes me think that I should be using it, e.g. for writing, more than I actually do, i.e. I need to get more in touch with my own emotions to create something, instead of wondering, so, how much it will affect other people or how other people affect me. I suppose he put for about sharing this. Right, so, let's... Hopefully, I'm trying to get the thing to pop up. There it is. Now we can go back to the model. Depends how I want to do this. If we go into specifics first. Well, generally, you know how INFJ uses FE. And I will come back to that. But we can start right here with... let's start with the FI minus. Right, first of all, and then we'll sort of like start from the beginning in the correct order. So, these are the simple one-line definitions, authorized definitions, translated by Maria, that Victor has for the function. So, relationship ethics is a function that shapes modest and empathetic behavior. There we go. And INFJs can be empathetic when they're in sort of like the counselor mode, working one-on-one with people. They're probably going to be less NIFE, more NIFI. Remember, David Keirsey called their role variant the counselor. Now let's do the charge. Charge is over here. They said FI minus. So... Now these are contrasted and they can split in between. So we've got here, keeping others at a distance, being suspicious, holding a grudge, such as the ethics of ESI. I'll put ISFP there, but it doesn't actually translate across, so I shouldn't have put that. Relationship ethics of forgiveness, forgiving people, giving them the benefit of the doubt, grieving and comforting those struck by grief, being kind to others. That is the ethic of INFP. However, they are like that until they reach a certain threshold and then they will show the negative side of FI. So, for instance, ask an INFP what they think of Donald Trump, and you might see the FI minus come out. Right. Now, I didn't pause then for a laugh line. I paused then to take a sip. Right. So, now we're going to look at FI, and then we'll sort of go back to the beginning. Just trying to get you to buy in how INFJ uses FI. And we'll go through these bullet points here. I'll try and make it as big as possible. Right, so keeps things pleasant in his circle, stays away from rude, unpleasant persons. But they like ESTPs, I hear you ask. Yes, well, I suppose it's a sort of developed ESTP that they like. Peacemaker. And in fact, let's talk about that. The kind of ESTP that INFJs like is the ESTP that is a natural leader and just does something. And the INFJ sees them enact something, sees them as very capable, and sees such a person as the kind of person to follow by their example and presence. It's not just the case that anyone who is macho or aggressive, where the INFJ will succumb to that. Can't just have any old Tom, Dick, or Harry act in an aggressive way. It has to be the person demonstrating that they are sort of like the real deal in terms of competence, and then the INFJ would sort of submit themselves to that person. We'll talk a little bit about that later on, because it's got here, has respect for strong and determined people. But like I said, if an ESTP comes up to them and they're like, I want to be, that's not going to work. So anyway, all these things connect. Right, staying true from rude and pleasant persons, peacemaker, that's true, takes advantage of the situation in order to correct the relationship by passing judgment or distancing from destructive people. Yes, in Socionics, FI is ethics of relations. It has acute awareness of conflicts evolving around him, successfully calms down the participants through analyzing conflict in a sensitive way. Can show resentment towards someone, but won't hold a grudge. Right, so we've done that aspect. So that's how INFJ will use FI creatively in terms of relationships, and that is judging interpersonal distance and therefore what is appropriate. So it's not a valued function, it's just something that is done in order to implement the main goals, and the main goals are going to come from the valued functions. The valued functions being the same as the MBTI 4-stack model: NI+, FE+, TI-, and SE-. These are the valued functions that determine behavior. So now let's talk a bit about, so yeah, the social mission block. Imagine the role variant that Keirsey uses for this, the counselor. So you can see there, the NI+ and the FI. So the FI- is like interpersonal distance, working one-on-one with somebody. The NI+, so ENFJs and INFJs, using the MBTI codes, are directive and they're mentors, which means they guide people. So if you're comparing INFJ and INFP in terms of in the counselor role, the INFP might be better at connecting the pieces of information and seeing what the patterns are in behavior. However, the INFJ will probably be better at offering advice for how they could change, or saying things to them that would point them in a certain direction, because intuition of time is about especially in INFJ, is about intuition of change, really. And if you want to see more on that discussion, where I asked Victor that question, hey, why can't it be called intuition of change? And he gave a sort of answer for about 20 minutes about why it should be called intuition of time. But it makes it easy to think intuition of change, especially when you're dealing with, because Keirsey calls ENFJ in personology, the final work, the definitive work, he called ENFJ mentor educator and INFJ mentor counselor. So it's like genus and species. Right there. So let's talk about this stuff here, maximum energy. So this means these are the most preferred functions. So nothing controversial so far. That makes sense. Lead function Ni, maximum energy. So we've got here endowed with excess capacity. It consumes the lion's shares of the psyche's energy. Makes sense. It's the dominant function. Maybe too much. Maybe it's indulged too much. You see these people that get stuck in their lead function. Here we go. The more. So it's like maximum energy, not optimum energy. Maybe a little bit more than it should be. The more powerful the first function, the more distance the communicative field covers. Now, certain dominant functions are going to be more noticeable than others, just because of the way they are. But with certain people, you can just see, whoa, you can see that dominant SE coming off them, or you can see their dominant NE. The dominant SE, like with ESTPers, dominant NE, I'm just giving examples, Durban. ENFP, they're giving off a lot of NE. SI, some of them are harder to see than others. FE, the extroverted ones are sort of easier to see. NI, you can sort of see, maybe they have like the NI stare, maybe. Maybe the what are the ones? I don't know. The certain. So the idea is, when it's in the externalities row, when it's the lead function, is more noticeable. Again, nothing more controversial there. Now, I've recently reconceived this as, when talking about externalities, internalities, that it's about scope of use. So, FE plus is strong, but its scope of use is limited compared to, say, ENFJ. It's strong in ENFJ, but they have a larger scope, a wider scope of use of extroverted feeling. So again, nothing controversial. So now there's a relationship between the lead function and the demonstrative function, the auxiliary function in MBTI. So what Victor has here, let's go through these bullet points. Externalities quartet activated by external stimulation at the function in the launcher position. Right. Function in the launcher position is TI minus. What I'll do a little bit on the model now about the launcher, which is this one. Right. So we've got here, this launcher position is very weak in terms of energy, but is extremely sensitive in terms of information. And so it needs input from the outside. So for instance, the function in this position is triggered from the outside. Thus it is referred to as launcher. This is the most sensitive and is about new data input or collecting the feedback. So remember now, INFJs are TI minus launcher. And then we'll see what that means, what the model will predict. Because it is very sensitive, the function in this position is chronologically first. And Victor does use these terms. He doesn't say elements, he does say function, and he does say position. That's not just me. In this, so that's why you'll hear him in Hangout say a Russian word that sounds like function when he's talking about the information element. Because it is very sensitive, the function in this position is chronologically first, i.e. launches the new round of mental activity. So the NI is stimulated by the TI. We'll have a look at that. paired with number 5 in demonstrative. Okay, and I'll go into that later. MTI equivalent, tertiary. Model A, modulators, modalizing hidden agenda. Tote model equivalent, test phase. We won't go into the tote model in this one. It's a sort of an analog. You can look it up, folks. It's TO. It's spelled there. Test, operate, test, exit. Right. So I know I'm doing things out of order, but it's just the way it is. It is chronologically first. So INFJs are stimulated by TI. So in the absence of clear rules, may be disorganized. Thoughts and actions are somewhat random and chaotic. In his decision-making, he lacks capacity for objective analysis, may feel lost in unusual complex circumstances, but brief and clear instructions, what to do and what not to do, will put him in motion. So these brief and clear instructions from the outside. Now this can be from a person or from a book. So this is why you can get the INFJ that is intellectual. And I'll talk, actually I'll mention it now. So you can get a situation where, and this happened with Maria, who was a mathlete in Moscow in the 80s, where, because she liked the teacher very much, this is where the INFJ can act like an INTP, because it's called a beneficiary shift. And it is shown in this diagram. Beneficiary shift. Where's beneficiary? It should be that one to that one. It should be that square to that square. Now let's find it. Let's hunt it down. Kindred. No. Got to try to go to 4 to 1. 4 to 1. There we go. That's how we find it. Square 4 to square 1. Right. So let's look on here. I don't think that's the right one. Here we go. So square 4 to square 1. TINI, which is the Gulenko code, the Gulenko functional name for INTP. So if they're stimulated enough from the outside, they can act like, temporarily act, or for a sustained period, but not the whole life, act like an INTP. Because it's like the TI logic coming in, suddenly that starts off the NI, and then they start thinking about it in like something I need to research more about, a vortex synergetic way. That's their form of cognition. Victor started out as a philosopher, and he was able to analyze the form of cognition of various philosophers. What did we put here? May feel lost. Also ESTP with a very strong TI. System changes and rearrangements do not upset him too much, but rather invigorate and help stay focused on the principal goal. So it gives the impression here that, like I said, low energy, pessimum energy, so less than minimum, has insufficient power to solve complex or repetitive tasks. It's unable to work for a large load. Its purpose is only to start a new circuit of mental activity. So it needs help from the outside. But because in many cultures the INFJ has access to books, they can be launched by TI. Because, you know, a lot of books will be structured and logical, and I can start them off with their Li+. And this is probably, so based on this, I would say that INFJs might do a lot of reading. Right then, so now we're going to go back to externalities, internalities. So scope of use of NI. So the scope of use is wide, and the power is a lot in terms of energy. Let's have a look at, or the amount that is devoted, the psyche devotes to it, the preference. So let's go back to what it says for management. So just basically all the things that you get with the dominant function. But Victor will add government and the psyche, in charge of setting goals and making decisions, paired with position manipulative, which is the SE in the case of INFJ, young dominant, tote model equivalent test phase. Dario Nardi rule. Basically, if it's a judging function, the area of the brain associated would be more active in these people, and if it's a perceiving function, like the whole brain state will be more active. Also, the EEG research showed that the FI areas that were active quite a bit for INFPs were also active for INFJs. Right, so let's look a little bit at demonstrative. Strongest position at close range. According to it, man is asserting itself. At the same time, it's a signal for attracting your jewel. Position used. So basically, the idea is INFJ would attract ESTP with positive emotionality. And ESTP, according to Keirsey, is the best type of reading body language. So they need. ESTP is not very good at reading someone's mind. They need positive emotionality. Think about Donald Trump at his rallies, where all of his supporters give him these positive emotionality, and he'll then invite them up on stage. Right. Position use triggers up as activity, so it stimulates. Okay, we'll look at that a bit later. You can see that. The reason I'm sort of going in this odd structure is I want to explain about internalities, externalities. Right then. So scope of in introverts, the externalities are all introverted. So let's have a look. Externalities indicates that the function circuit is directed towards society, the functional circuit. So all of these four. So the idea is that an introvert acts in society like an introvert. Now, Dario Nardi did say in the back of his book, 8 Keys to Self-Leadership, that introverts have a preference overall for all of their introverted functions. So Dario Nardi independently agrees with Victor Gulenko when it comes to this thing. So, for instance, I think he said comfort. And it said for extroverts, overall have a comfort for all of their extroverted functions. Right. Which makes sense. Here we go. The externalities group takes precedence whenever society is involved. Therefore, we placed it above internalities because when it comes to survival and development, socionalities has greater importance than a single type. Right. Okay. That it might be like going a bit farther, political maybe. And also, when somebody is acting at range, he thinks it suppresses the lower row. So, for instance. So we have here, indicated by down arrows, top functions suppress lower functions, but on its territory, the bottom functions are free from the control of the upper functions. Analogy, rider, horse. Right. So, Ni plus is the rider, Fe plus is the horse. So the Fe in the INFJ is suppressed by their lead function, which is Ni, and the most introverted of all the functions. So you can see there a massive contradiction between, in terms of like someone's affect, Ni, the most introverted function, and Fe plus, the most socially extroverted function. So there's a big contradiction there in the INFJ. So when they're in that mode, it's the Fe is being suppressed. So now, did I talk about the creative function? Right, and then we'll talk about how the social mission block works. With the internalities, right. Okay, I'll look at that when I go down to that block. So this is the creative function working together with the lead function. The idea is it works so closely together. So let's put it like this. The INFJ fish doesn't know it's wet with Fi. Execution of decisions made at stage 1, this one. The function implements or creates the function that is flexible and unconventional, which is also associated with creativity, paired with position break. Yep, talk about that later. What is done rather than what is said is thought. What is done rather than what is thought and or said. So ESTP doesn't talk about TE stuff, they just do it. So it's not necessarily high, and you can see there what Dario's written. So I will go through the bullet points. You see, I'm going a little bit around the house because I don't want to forget. Now I'm on the creative. I know I'm going a little bit of a crazy order, but let's have a look at creative function. So creative function in the various types, how they are good at the creative function. So we've got here, where are the IN types? Yes, INXX. So all types with IN in their code. All those types are good at NI, e.g. INTP and INFP can see the logical and ethical consequences. The downside of this is that it inhibits SE, because SE is, according to Dario Nardi, immersing yourself in the present context. Seeing the consequences of actions can be inhibiting. That's how you see it in INFP and INTP. I don't want to go over this too much because you can see it right there. Let's look at our type INFJ. IF. So types are good at FI. INFJ and ICJ are good at one-to-one relations and covertly guiding the ethics of their FI polar duals, ENTP and ESTP. Right. Okay. What else? Oh, there's something I've got to show you. Right. Thinking of this lead function in INFJ, I'm just going to contrast NI plus with NI minus. So, and I also have the incomplete INTJ, where we will look at the NI minus, and that will contrast those two functions. So NI overall is the intuition of time, a function that manifests in contemplative wait-and-see behavior. Right, NI plus. Yes, this might take me a long time to get through this. NI plus. Wondering about the future, believing in a good outcome, being hopeful, holding vision, bringing the future into the present. That's how I.E.I. works. But they don't really bring it into the present though, because they need their dual ESTP to like kick them up the backside and get them to implement intuition of the past, thinking of the past, remembering past errors, and trying to prevent them from happening again. Extrapolating, looking for signs of the past repeating itself. That's how I.E.I. operate. So, for instance, Haley, who I've done many hangouts with, is I.E.I. and she gets inhibited by always with this negative intuition of time and seeing where things can go wrong. Now, Keirsey called this in the mastermind profile, he called this contingency planning. The INTJ is always good at contingency planning. Oh, what can go wrong? Let's try to head that off at the past. And now the problem with too much NI minus is that people get too pessimistic and don't enact because they see the downside of everything. So let's compare. First of all, we'll do NI minus so that I don't forget. Right, so NI minus in INTJ. Right. Has eye for detail. He's good at noticing contradictions and omissions. Yep. Skeptical of hasty initiatives. Very careful. Is capable of waiting for the right moment to act. Ironic. They have been known to be sarcastic. INTJs. Has a philosophical and contemplative outlook on life. Makes generalizations based on observations. Patiently guides others, preparing them for the next step. If they're well developed. Otherwise, they're just directive. Acts strategically on the basis of long-term goals, has a good memory, is capable of remembering large amounts of associative information. So NI minus, let's compare that with NI plus. I believe that is this one. Right there. Let's make this bigger. Right. Has a romantic approach to life, A gift for dreaming big and anticipating positive changes, can wait patiently until they happen, trusts his gut feelings, strives with positive thinking, bringing others' attention to the ways current problems can resolve themselves, knows the right moment to approach a person, prefers hints and allegories to direct statements. Right. So this works with this. So, right here, knows the right moment to approach a person. And if you think of the FI, how that can work together, where you're judging the interpersonal distance. So if you can judge the interpersonal distance, it sort of helps you to know when is the right time to approach someone, when to guide someone, what kind of advice to offer. So I talked about that as a social mission. Contribute to socionize society, showing their specialization. I am going to talk about the social adaptation block later on. I'm going to go to the, I've mentioned, there's a couple of things I can mention for this block. So, you have NI suppressing FE, FI suppressing SE. Right. Right, okay, let me think about that. Right. So SE, I know that Socionics does it as force, but I'll go further and say it's immersing yourself in the present context. So maybe when the INFJ is thinking about interpersonal distance and what is appropriate in the moment, and also what the appropriate behavior is, that will inhibit their ability to improvise in the moment. Right. Internalities. This is the self-affirmation block, and this is something where the person acts on their territory when they're in their comfort zone. So at close psychological distance, functions included in this bottom row are called internalities, which means that they are aimed at its territory. And then these functions there, I think when working externally, internalization is suppressed and muted by the vertical supervision one-way inhibition ties. The function in the first position constrains the fifth, the second constrains the sixth, the third constrains the seventh, and the fourth constrains the eighth. So, self-affirmation block. So, here's an idea that this would be supervisee shift where the INFJ can act like ESFJ. So I suppose if they're very close to someone, they can be caring for them. Now, ESFJ in Model G is FESE, meaning that don't mess with the ESFJ, and the ESFJ will bring emotional pressure. Because, like, think of the ESFJ mother that will bring the pressure on their children if they don't live up to expectations. So, let's go through these bullet points. Let's go closer in. Oh, and then I'll do the other shift. So I've done beneficiary shift to INTP. I've done supervisee shift. Now let's do, I'll go through these and then I'll do semi-dual shift. Right, let's eliminate that self-affirmation block. So INFJ is very proud of these functions. You'll notice them on YouTube, always talking about these things. So you might have some saying, "Oh, I'm really good at extroverted sensing. I just choose not to be." So here, friendly disposition, charming, keeps smiling in spite of internal anxiety. Yep. Good at comforting others, cheering up and making them laugh, has a keen sense of humour, can be dramatic but not in a provocative way. Lyric poetry is their most natural and convincing way of artistic expression. Right. We've done FE plus. No. I'll show you what FE plus is. Right. One word descriptions of this one. Ethics are in motion, a function that shapes demonstrative and expressive behavior. So FE plus is going to be E plus, and it's going to be somewhere on here. Where is it? Here it is. So ESFJ, positive emotionality, happy, expressing enthusiasm, being friendly and open with people. Right. Ethics of negative emotions, being angry, indignant, dramatizing events, ridiculing others, escalating confidence, emotion. That's the way of ENFJ. A little bit controversial, but now a little bit of the theory. The higher a function up is in terms of preference, the more that the charges can be switched between. So ENFJ can switch easily between FE minus and FE plus, but they can be melodramatic. So go back to this. And let's look at extroverted sensing, then we'll look at very reductionist in my opinion. Power sensor, a function that is responsible for stimulation, aggression, build-up, and release. Let's look at different kinds of power sensor. SE plus, non-compliance, forming alliances against a stronger enemy, being assertive about their demands and protecting their interests. Such is the FE plus of SEE, who knows how to maneuver between more powerful figures. And that sort of fits observations that ESFP is more about freedom, ESTP is more about power. So look at Trump. Compare Trump and Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton being ESFP and Trump ESTP, 200% ESTP. Playing on others' soft spots, having them depend on you, building a hierarchy, that's the way of SLE. Leads his crew. Right then. I will talk about that. Remember what did I mention? I mentioned semi-dual shift, so that's going to be square 6 to square 5. Where is square 6 to square 5? Where did it go? There it is. Square 6 to square 5. That's how you find the semi-dual. And the other one is... what did I mention for the other one? I can't remember. Oh, supervisor shift. Supervisor shift should be square 5 to square 6. So this one. Right, there, 5 to 6, the supervisor shift. Right, so... now we'll talk about extroverted sensor. Self-affirmation block. They want to get better at these, and these are two valued functions, so you can see the value. Lead function, valued, hot for TI. They can get that from books. INFJs have an attraction to INTPs, but not totally, because the INTP does not supply the INFJ with what it wants most, SE. Right, so what they want here has respect for strong and determined people. INTP is not really fulfilling that. INTP can launch them intellectually, but they're not strong and determined people. Tries to discourage others from getting unglued or looking for someone to blame. Responsive to calls for help. May show unexpected courage under pressure. When driven by strong emotions, becomes single-minded and pushy. Now, here is the key concept. You see here that they can be very strong with the SE, but its scope of use is limited. So, for instance, here, driven by strong emotions, so the scope of use, when driven by strong emotions, becomes single-minded and pushy. They're not doing it all the while, like ESTP. Their scope of use is wider. Unexpected courage under pressure, responsive to calls for help. So it's like the scope of use of it, and the same with the FE plus, scope of use. So people closer to them, remember that's the thing, externalities, internalities. When it's not being suppressed from the outside, it can come out. Right there, I did the self-affirmation block. Right, now I can talk about the shifts. So, semi-dual shift. Did we do supervisor shift? Did we do supervisor shift? Yes, when they act like ESFJ. Right, semi-dual shift. Now, this might be a little bit controversial, but what the model would say, so semi-dual, you get the semi-dual by going from square 6 to square 5. So in INTP, that would be FENE, which is ENFJ. So, if a INFJ is acting like an ESFP, that would be a semi-dual shift. So, what would that look like? Well, it might look like, to be honest, slutty behavior, because you're going for SE and FE, where you've got kind of SPE, like sensation-seeking kind of behavior combined with the expressiveness, where like ESFPs will use FE creatively, not valued, but in order to be the center of attention, in order to be an attention whore. So that's when you get the semi-dual shift. Right. Now, actually, I just pulled that out my backside, but I pulled it out my backside using deduction and things that I've observed it in a certain INFJ on Facebook, but I will not name names. Right. Right, I did the self-affirmation blog. I've done the shifts. I mentioned the beneficiary shift. And this is in a benefit ring. So, for instance, the benefactor of INFJ is FISI. Is that the INFJ secretly looks up to the ISFP, because the ISFP is somebody who is also poetic. They've got that edge to them. They've got that action to them. Because remember, they're hot for SE, the INFJ. Right, and then the benefactor of ISFP is SITI, and then the benefit ring goes round to TI and I. Right. What we're going to talk now? Right. Social adaptation block. So, when dealing with a task, and NI and FI don't work, INFJ, and it's like an external task, so it's not like something that they can go to their self-affirmation block with. Social adaptation block. So, right, functions of this unit provide stability in society. Without them, it is impossible to function normally if the mission is not performed for any reason. Have to adapt. So, INFJ might be in a situation where they can't use the NI. Might be a situation where they've got to do some housework with the SI. You know, role, go to the role function. Or it depends how we look at the SI. Right, let's look at minimum energy. They can do it, but here we go. Function is at minimum for the solution of the corresponding task level energy consumption. Thus, it is able to regularly solve repetitive single tasks. So, this means INFJs can get by with housework. And you're thinking, Ben, why are you saying it like that? Well, let's have a look at Socionics defines SI. Right there. SI is comfort center, a function which is responsible for practical care of bodily needs such as rest, nourishment, clothing, shelter. Right there. Right, let's think about this. Let's think of an NLP concept called, okay, no, not necessarily NLP. Actually, yes, downtime. Well, yes, these two things are at odds with each other, but they're part of the overall same receptive adaptive temperament, Jungian temperament rather than Keirsey temperament. If the person is in like an NI mode, where they're sort of like in their unconscious, that is opposite to them being in their body. So they sort of mutually suppress each other. Haley has talked about like looking through a window and like going into a different world and sort of like, and even sometimes losing it, like just momentarily, like when she's driving and it's just a blank because she's gone into the NI mode and not knowing how she got there. So now we can look at the charges, SI plus and SI minus, which is going to be this one. Right then, I've got to take another sip. My mouth's getting dry. Here we go. SI plus. Adjusting the environment to make yourself comfortable as you can. Make your tone to be autonomous. Oh yes, something I need to mention. Plus means maximizing the positive. Minus means minimizing the negative. Adjusting the environment to make yourself as comfortable as you can. Right. SI minus, treating of a malady or resolution of everyday discomfort. So the minimization of discomfort. Right. So it's right, here we go. So now we can go to SI plus. Minimum energy for it, but they get by. INFJ can get by with that, with the caring roles and the housework. Knows how to dress elegantly with a unique touch. Often complains of poor health or discomfort, but will push himself to do usual routine work no matter how he feels. I suggest people watch the Hangout with Chris Montoya, who is very INFJ and really related to this profile. Maria is also in that Hangout, and she translated this profile, and they connected quite a bit. They are of the same type. Brings to his relationship practical care and concern about the other's nutrition, health, and comfort. Striving for harmony of body and spirit. Given time, it can adjust to a wide variety of living conditions. So, for instance, here, brings to his relationships practical care and concern about the other's nutrition, health. So, you can see how the role function with time can develop and be quite strong because it's the same Jungian temperament as the lead function, i.e. internally a introverted perceiving function. Because, as you know, in socionics, INFJ is INF little p, and ISFJ is ISF little p. So, overall temperament, receptive, adaptive. So they can get better at that. But again, minimum energy for it. Now, I mentioned TI plus earlier on. Oh, but I don't think I gave the definition. Oh yeah, so this is why they like INTPs a little bit. So for a limited amount of time, well, that might just be me. I hope you're listening, INFJs. Now, TI plus and TI minus. So, logic of uniform structure. Securing the structure that is proven to work while considering all other structures incorrect. Rationalizing one and only one right decision. Stubbornly following your principles. Thorough reading of directions or draft. Linear, either or way of thinking. That is the logic of information socionics as well as the structural logic. So you see there, he's getting a dig in against the traditional socionics. Now also, this is a point of departure from American school typology, which in that I would include MBTI and Dario Nardi and Keirsey, where the socionics LSI would be the MBTI ISTJ. But it's my personal opinion is that socionics has got it wrong when it comes to the sensory introverts. But the TI minus is right. So for instance here, multi-angle thinking. That's the kind of logic that can see order in chaos and allows describing the same object in multiple ways. The logic of contradictions and paradoxes. Multidimensional polymorphic logic, relaxed and or alternatives. This is the logic of energy socionics and the kind of structural logic characteristic of LLI. Right, I'm going to get you another shift now. Right. Now, if you look at the descriptions very carefully for Enneagram Type 7, only NPs and one other type can be an Enneagram Type 7 because of the emphasis on transcontextual thinking, or the monkey mind as they call it. This is a situation where INFJ, which is the only other type apart from NPs that can technically be an Enneagram Type 7, is where they go into something called the mirage shift, which is square 8, square 7. And I'll prove it. There is the mirage shift. Square 8 to square 7. And so this means that INTP will act like ESTJ. Right. So, because that's part of it. Because what is ENTP? NETE and NETI, NeTx. So, for instance, so what we got here? We've got with TI minus, we have, what did we look at before? We said multi-angle thinking. And then the stuff with the NE minus, curiosity and stuff. So you can see how that sounds like Enneagram Type 7. Plus that has a lot of information for that function. So we'll come back to this later. So INFJs can be Enneagram Type 7. Because I believe that you've got to be strong with the NE to be an Enneagram Type 7. Because hedonistic does not mean Enneagram Type 7. Yes, Enneagram Type 7 is hedonistic, but they're also a head type. And they also do all the transcontextual thinking stuff. So, now maybe that's an error in Enneagram. But, key thing, transcontextual thinking. So basically me, and that's why recently I've been typed as an Enneagram Type 7. Right, what are we on? We did this block, didn't we? And we did the TI, right? Self-affirmation, self-adaptation block. Right. Now we get to the INFJ's problem area. The problem area. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this. Get some more information. Right, we did the role function. Here we go. So, Victor's, you have to have constant practice to get better at this function. A function that is trained the way an athlete is trained by a coach or an actor is rehearsing his part, hence the usual name role function. There's Victor using some transcontextual thinking. Just like an LII, just like an athlete needs to keep training to maintain his muscle mass, so the person needs to keep training this function or it will lose effectiveness. E.g., LII, my type, needs to keep monitoring their behavior to stop going into bad habits such as interrupting people in hangouts. In a dual relationship, the TINX's role FI is trained by the ESFJ's control FI, which is in this position. Right, paired with position 8i control. This is the function which, the function in this position, covertly trains this one in the dual. Exit phase in the tote model. Should I show you the tote model? Oh, I think I will. What I think I'll do is I'll put that on screen for you to look at while I do my Linux thing and I find the tote model. Tote diagram. That's one to be sent by Maria, and then I'll copy that one there. Right. Alright, let's get to that tote model. Where'd it go? Here it goes. Here it is. Right then, folks. This is for the, there you go, test, operate, test, exit. The model shown as tote model, which stands for test, operate, test, exit. The comparison is the test. The operation is where you apply your resources. Test is comparing again. Exit from the loop when you evidence procedure tells you your outcome has been achieved. Now then, folks, this is yet another example of Victor Gulenko exhibiting INTP behavior by noticing the similarities between his model with the 4-stage process and the TOTE model. And it's also a rhetorical tool to say, oh, this 4-step process is correct. Look at all these other examples that have a 4-step process. Right, so let's get back to the inflation avoidance block. Now, recently, you'll notice that it wasn't called that in the other Hangout. It was called the inflation block. Victor informed me it should be called the inflation avoidance block. So I went back and changed all the diagrams, all the graphics. So, again, swelling of information in the absence of real energy. So again, you've got here transcontextual thinking. Victor lived through the hyperinflation in the Soviet Union, post-Soviet Union in the 1990s. And that inflation wasn't the result of economic growth. It was because of monetary expansion. Right, so overvoltage on this block leads to the collapse of the mind, just as monetary inflation leads to the collapse of the economy. Again, transcontextual thinking. Right, here we go. So, right, now, right, the function that is this is where it gets complicated. The function that is created, the one a person should create almost from scratch in order to survive, the usual name of the function is break, as its motivation tends to slow people down and drain them. Right. It's like the one a person should create almost from scratch in order to survive. Right, okay, so it's almost like INFJs don't know where to start with TE. It's like they literally do not know where to start because they're not they really do not have the energy for TE. This is for ISFJ. Okay, Dario Nardi, again, is back in the zone. Least preferred function along with function in role position because of preference for functions in management and demonstrative positions which have minimum energy. If you don't believe me, buy his book, A Keys to Self-Leadership. Right. Okay, I'll do break and then I'll go to control and then I'll call it a night. Break. Right. Weakest function. How do you get the break function? You flip the vertness of the tertiary. What is the tertiary function of the INFJ again? TI. Flip the vertness, TI changes to TE. Right, paired with creative. So, how does FI suppress TE? That is tricky. Tricky to explain because it's used creatively. All I can say is they have preference for FE, and the FE suppresses the TE because they're sort of in competition with each other between harmony and productivity. And the fact that INFJs just find it really boring and they find TI a lot more interesting, especially TI minus. Right, TI plus. Oh, look what you get here. You get the supervisor. The supervisor of INFJ is ENTJ. Right. So look there, you got the supervisee, the supervisor. Oh yes. Oh yes. Look at this. All of these have the same form of cognition. Vortex synergetic. INFJ, ESFJ, ENTJ, ISTJ, or SLI rather. Right. So, Again, avoidance. Avoidance. They will avoid TE stuff. Right. I'll expand the control position in a minute or two. Not frugal. Oh yes, TE. How to define TE? Right. TEP. Business logic. A function that shows active, obstinate, enduring behavior. Right. TE. Where's TE? Especially TE plus. TE plus. Investing to make profit, valuing profit over usefulness, exchanging rates and prices, constantly updating the product, responding to demand quickly, such as the business logic of LIE, ENTJ. Business logic of saving, working efficiently, being economical, using resources visually, working hard. That is the business logic of LSE, ESTJ. So that's it. ESTJ is much more conservative with their business logic, much more by the book. ENTJ is looking for the opportunities. Now, a lot of that is to do with the creative NE in the ENTJ. Right, that's INTJ, that's the wrong one. Let's go here. So, not frugal, sometimes spends on a whim and is left with no money or necessities. There's an interesting moment in the hangout with Chris Montoya where he said, okay, move on. Something like that. While working, the associative train of thought quickly leaves him away, so it's hard to stay on task. Tries to make the most of the resources that fall into his hands, though any entrepreneurial activity involving risks tends to exhaust him quickly. Usually spends a lot of energy on a project with modest outcome. Right, now we're going to talk about the NE position. The last one. Coach. Remember, this coach is the jewel. Loads and loads and tons of information for this function. So, for example, I've talked to Haley about this, INTJ. She has a load of possibilities for her businesses. Loads and loads and loads of possibilities occur in her head. But she doesn't enact them. Because it's like she ignores them because it contradicts the NI master plan. Coach, whose function is to drill others rather than perform by himself. It is commonly referred to as the control function as it keeps monitoring the surroundings. Least energy but biggest information, the actions for which the person is closely monitoring. It is very sensitive. About it, the type thinks a lot. Right. You're already subscribed to my channel, I hope. So, about it, the type thinks a lot. So, going back to INFJ. So, very sensitive to TI, thinks about NE a lot. So you can see how the INFJ can act like the INTP and why they like talking to INTPs sometimes. Right. Curious. And also how this type can be an Enneagram type 7 in terms as an introvert, in terms of intellectually, like going from subject to subject to subject, finding the connections, lack of self-discipline, that kind of thing. It's a rare combination, but I'll stick to my guns by the way the profile is written by Naranjo. Only MPs and INFJ can be an Enneagram type 7. Now, what I would say is maybe Naranjo didn't write the profile right because he was unaware of Jungian types. Right, so, NE. Curious, has a soft spot for new and unusual things, will easily see through attempts to hide or fake something, frequently oscillates between humble and inflated views of capabilities and talents, while pushing those close to him to take risks and explores, typically will not lead by example. Not got the energy for it. Pessimum energy. Not got the energy to enact. Not got the energy to be like type with lead NE minus. ENFP. They've not got the energy. So a lot of times INFJs, it's like they're either in the emo mode or they're like the intellectual INTP or in these various shifts. They've got this, so going to be very complicated people with a huge amount of potential, but huge also a lot of problems as well. troubled individuals, and David Keirsey's profile in the INFJ talked about they're good at working with troubled individuals because they are complicated themselves. Also, another reason why they're complicated is their first function is a dynamic function. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So, now I will appear on camera. Right, so we talk about that. I'll do that over here. Here I am, folks. Right, so a dynamic function means that internally the INFJ is going to be affected a lot by their outer conditions. So it's like their mood is connected to their outer conditions. So even though in functional terms their top function is a perceiver, is perceiving, and this is why INF Socionics call them INF little j. No, INF little p, sorry. So this is why they then compensate and control their surroundings. And that's where the J comes from in MBTI, because MBTI measures the behavior in order to get the JP. So the dynamic is externally structured and OCD to compensate. And if you got a static lead function, then say then you are less likely to be affected by things around you, and less likely. So that is why, say, INTP, that in Socionics is INT little j, lead function, a rational function, a judging function, a static function. Static because this is the logic, it's stuck to it. Or with INFP, this is the ethics, stick to it. So they don't need to change their environment in order to change their mood, to stabilize their mood. So when you're judging their behavior, their JP is like perceiver. So folks, after all that is that. That is it. So bye-bye.